Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Father in heaven, as we begin Bible study this evening, help us day by day, that when we stand in difficult circumstances, difficult situations, may you show us the pathway forward. Help without turning to the right hand or to the left, but to stand firm in your name, defended by your word, and above all, live your truth in a world that seems to be so opposed to truth and integrity in this day and age. Lord, it was true for you, it was true for your disciples, and it's true for our generation. Help us to remain faithful to you in all things, that you may receive the honor, the glory, and the praise from this day forth and forevermore. Amen. Story where St. Paul has gone all the way to Jerusalem. He's been asked by the church in Jerusalem to carry out the vow, the Nazarite vow, for 4 men. He's gone to pay for the tribute to be carried out, only to find himself being arrested and being accused of bringing Gentiles into the temple and defiling that holy place. They drag him out of the temple. They shut the temple doors to make sure that if there's any bloodshed, never mind a human life, is in danger and about to suffer for something that really they couldn't prove. If he'd brought somebody of a Gentile descent in the temple, where was the Gentile? And we're never told that. But we are told that Paul asks the tribune after being arrested if he could speak to the people, and he addresses them in their Aramaic tongue, in the sacred language. We're told that the crowd became absolutely quiet as he made his defense. Everything was going well until he mentioned the fact that God chose him to carry the message to the Gentiles. And at that point, things exploded. And we're told that the unfortunate thing is Paul now finds himself in the middle of a serious riot. The tribune takes him out completely and carries some freedom to move up and down. Paul has to prepare himself because this is going to be a relentless attack upon him until they accomplish what they want done, and that is to wipe him out, because they see him as a threat to their religion, to their temple, but more importantly, to their way of life. And I'm going to make sure that as we go through, that you need to acquaint yourself with, to realize that there is a heightening of that tension during this period of time that Paul is in Jerusalem. And then you're going to see that for his own safety, they finally take him on a journey far away from Jerusalem so that they can put some distance between him and the problem that is there. But it does not mean that those who are trying to destroy him are going to back off. They are on his heels, hot on his heels, to make sure they destroy him. And so I want us to be able to understand at the end of the day that Theophilus. He is given the impression, if you want to write it at the top of your note sheet, he is given the impression that the problem with Christianity does not lie with the Roman authorities, but with the Jewish authorities, who seem to be hell-bent on stamping out this new, what they call sect within their. And the problem is that Luke is obviously telling Theophilus, to whom this book is written along with the Gospel of Luke, if you really go back and study, you will see that it is not the Christians who stirred people to violence, but it's obviously the set of Jews who have come all the way from Asia Minor, who have been hunting down Paul since he left Asia Minor, followed him all the way back to Jerusalem, who were actually the ones who are stirring. Fortunately, the high priest and the others fall right in place. I need to say to you all that politics and politricks is still alive. Okay? It was back then, and it's still true to this very day. And so I want you to watch the dynamics as we go along. And we're going to talk about some of that when we get through chapters 23, 24, and 25. Chapter 23. Smile, Dawson. Jesus loves you.
Camera.
Good.
The Acts of the Apostle, chapter 23. Up to this day, I have lived my life with a clear conscience before God. Then the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near him to strike him on the mouth. At this, Peter said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, or you sitting and yet in violation of the law, you order me to be struck. Those standing nearby said, do you dare to insult God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not realize, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a leader of your people. When Paul noticed that some others were Pharisees, he called out in the council, brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of a Pharisees. I am on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead. Then he said this. When he said this, a dissension began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees said that there is no resurrection, or angel, or spirit. But the Pharisees and certain scribes of the Pharisees group stood up and contended, we find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him? When the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul to pieces, ordered the soldiers to go down, bring him by force, and bring him to the barracks. That night, the Lord stood near him and said, keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in witness also in Rome. In the morning, the Jews joined in a conspiracy and bound themselves by an oath, neither to eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who joined in this conspiracy. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food until we have killed Paul. And then you and the council was notifying you on the pretext that you want to make a more thorough examination of his case. And we are ready to do away with him before he arrives." Now the son of Paul's sister heard about the ambush. So he went and gained entrance to the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to report to you." He took him, brought him to the tribune, and said, "The prisoner Paul called me and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to tell you." The tribune took him by the hand, drew him aside privately, and asked, "What is it that you have to report to me?" He answered, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down as though they were going to inquire more thoroughly into his case. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him. They have bound themselves to an oath neither to eat nor drink until they kill him. They are ready now, ordering him, 'Tell no one that you have informed me of this.' Then he summoned 2 of the centurions and said, 'Get ready to leave by 9 o'clock tonight for Caesarea with 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride.' Felix the governor, he wrote a letter to this effect: 'Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. But when I learned that he was a Roman citizen, I came with the guard and rescued him. Since I wanted to know the charge, I had him brought to the council. I found that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but was charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldier instructions took Paul and brought him during the night to Antipatris. The next day, they let the horsemen go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he belonged to. And when he learned that he was from Sicilia, he said, "I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive." The Lord.
Thanks be to God. I think there's a serious problem because when people read this text, They don't realize that there are some undercurrents that are happening that we need to watch carefully. Look at chapter 23 carefully, people. Paul stands up to make his defense. He declares is that his conscience is clear. I'm innocent. I haven't done anything wrong. And the person who is high priest for that year orders somebody who's standing near the Paul to slap him across his mouth. Because as far as they were concerned, only the high priest had the authority, according to them at this stage in their development, to the or innocent. Let me tell you that this is where we get into some serious hot water. Within the breastplate of the high priest, there were two stones that he kept, called the Urim and the Thummim. And whenever cases were brought to the high priest, because they could not solve it at the lower level, the high priest was to take these two stones out, put them in a jar, and pray, innocent or guilty. You lawyers inside here would love it. Probably have a field day right now. He would shake the jar up and down. And then what he would do is he would turn the jar on the side, and whatever stone came out determined your fate. What's the problem with that, people? 50-50 chance. And the problem is no court of appeal. You can't shake them again. That's it. All right? And that determined your fate. And they had put their complete trust in the Urim and the Thummim, rather than doing what the scriptures ordered them to do. And I hope you make a note of it, people. There is no attempt to provide a witness. There's no attempt to gather evidence. All they have is a bunch of hot-headed people running around the room, making wild accusations. And the high priest, instead of him insisting on the law being kept in terms of witnesses, see, people, you could not do something to someone unless you had 2 to 3 witnesses. If you had 7, you needed to respect their rights. Okay? That's number 1. Number 2, the problem is that when you hear Paul says to the high priest, "Oh, you whitewashed wall," you may think he is insulting him. And Paul says, "Oh, I didn't even know he was the high priest." So Paul is doing that because the problem is that every year the Romans had taken it upon themselves to allow the priestly families, 4 of them in Jerusalem, to bid on the high priestly posts. So if you choose 4 men inside here and they represented the 4 families, they would raise enough money to give to the Romans so that their candidate could become high priest. When you read the gospel tradition, you hear about Caiaphas and Annas. You're not supposed to have 2 high priests at any given time. You only allowed 1 in Jewish law. And in Jewish law, that person remained high priest until the day that they died. And when they died, their son behind them would take over the office. But by the time we get to the stage of the Roman occupation of the promised land, we're going to decide who will be high priests.
whitewash wall mean? What does that mean?
Graves. He's telling him you're a grave. Yes, like outside, like in the graveyard.
Whitewash wall, selling to high priest.
They whitewashed them because they wanted them to be seen so that people would not come near them to be contaminated. So what St. Paul is literally saying to them is, you whitewash, putting on a good front. But the unfortunate thing is that you fill with what? What are those graves filled with out there? Bones. Exactly. You're filled with defilement. And so when he talks about him being high priest, Paul says, oh, I didn't realize you were high priest. He's literally digging him and telling him, I didn't know that you were the high priest. I thought it was somebody else. And unfortunately, here they are being tough on Paul when they themselves are not keeping the law. Make sure you write it down somewhere. What's the sense of correcting this poor man if you don't have your act together? And to this very day, in most of Palestine, they will whitewash the touch a grave, you are considered unclean. Okay? When people go to the graveyard, that's why you find a faucet, a spigot on the outside so that they could wash themselves and purify their hands. The Jewish graveyard up here should have one in there, as far as I'm concerned. That should be there, but I'm sure it's somewhere in that graveyard. Yeah. And so they really, St. Paul is putting his hand on the problem. He says, you know, who's really the high priest? And you've diminished your authority by having more than one because you're not following Jewish law. Where are the witnesses? Where's the testimony? Where's the evidence? What makes matters worse is this, that the rest of the party, and see, I really have trouble with this when you're going to declare people's innocence through the high priest, when you really should have followed the law to discover what was the status of the person. You don't leave it in the hands of the high priest alone. He is the last resort. And even he realized that, because you don't decide, I can decide your case right now. You're asking for direction from God to make sure the right stone comes out. Okay? That is what casting lots means. Okay? When Jonah gets on the boat and you hear that they cast lots to discover who was the culprit who brought the storm upon them while they were on the sea, what they did is they wrote all of the sailors' names on little stones, and they to their gods and shook the pot up and said, show us who causing us to go through the storm right now. And Jonah's name came out. And when Jonah's name came out, that's when they said to him, what have you done that your God has brought this trouble upon us on the sea? Okay, remember they already thrown off the cargo, they've already lightened the ship, they're being prepared for anything to happen at this point. And by shaking, I want you all to remember, that's not the only place where you saw casting of lots. You saw casting of lots in Acts chapter 1, when they chose the apostle to replace Judas. They put the two names into a jar and said, Lord, show us who is to become the apostle? And Matthias' name came out. And you never hear about Matthias after that. About Justus, you hear about him again in Acts chapter 16, which we saw when they had the first council. Let's go on. The minute Paul realized the makeup of the Sanhedrin council was dominated by the Sadducees. But the people who held the real power in ancient Palestine were the scribes, the lawyers. The Sadducees not only rejected the afterlife, the resurrection of the dead, the Sadducees also did not believe beyond the first 5 books of the Bible. They ignored the rest of it altogether. The Sadducees were determined that they were going to run the state. And they were made. The Pharisees, on the other hand, accepted all the books of the Jewish Tanakh. They believed in angels. They believed in the afterlife. They believed in things spiritual. They believed most of the things that would come close to Christianity. And so what Paul did, he played one group off another. And so they got into this argument. And Paul says, you know what, I'm here because I believe in the resurrection. And the minute he said that, the Pharisees were the ones who said, oh, goody, he's one of us. But the problem is this, people. Remember, this is a religious group of people. And what happens? Tell me what happens. War. Trouble broke out. It became so violent. Oh, for Jesus, you church people carry on like that? Jesus. And then, people, I want you to see who comes to rescue Saul or Paul before they tear him apart. It's the Roman team and take Paul out before they tear him to pieces. Obviously, they were so filled with so much conviction that conviction led to violence. And that amazes me, people, because that's like having an AGM meeting and all of a sudden people start throwing furnitures and chairs around the room. Okay? Something is wrong. Something is fundamentally wrong. Okay? That's the problem with our neighbors to the north. Okay? When you get to the stage that you think that violence is acceptable. I was listening to the news while I was packing up my stuff to come down for Bible study, and they were talking about this gentleman who's a part of it, who handed out fake grenades to the members of Congress. And I'm saying to myself, why would you be handing out grenades to people in an atmosphere that has been charged ever since you had the problem with those people rioting on January 6th? Why? It's almost like they're feeding this things. And so I have serious problems with this because it takes the foreigners, those who they despise, who are the ones who rescue Paul. And so I want you to make a note in your notes that it is the Roman officials who come to rescue Paul. And whether that night the Lord stood next to Paul and told him what?
Keep up your courage.
Keep up your courage, for
Yes, as you have testified in Jerusalem.
so you must bear witness also for me where? In Rome. In other words, in the religious capital, you bore witness. Now you're going to go to the main capital of the empire to bear witness for me. You think there wouldn't be any more surprises in the text? In the morning, who did what? They conspired and bound themselves with an oath. In other words, I swear by the living God, I will not eat and I will not drink until I kill this man. For Jesus' sake, that's religious people for your boy? Hmm? Yes, Timmy has a question. Where's the microphone?
Yeah, I just wonder what is about the people for 40 when they die.
And
They die. Or they come there for
they
5
must
days.
have.
And then when for another 2 years,
That's right.
so now when they gotta say that, something
I have no idea what happened to them. They either died or had to compromise themselves. Hmm?
I think they changed mind.
After they have put together the conspiracy in verses 12 and 13, look at their next stop in verse 14. Jesus of mercy. They went to the president. Oh, sorry, the chief priest. To see what they should do. They've strictly bound ourselves on those. They're telling him, we're plotting to commit murder. Now we need your help. And look at what they tell the high priest to do. Tell the tribune, we need to question Paul more thoroughly. Bring him down this way, under pretext that you're going to carry out a more thorough examination. But you don't have to worry. But you see, when you got 40 people, somebody can burp the message out somewhere. They always do. Only need 2 people, and you know one got slip. And so the 40, out of that 40, somebody ends up telling poor Paul's sister, who sends her son, tell him exactly what is going on. And Paul arranges for the young man to go to the centurion, with the centurion to the tribune, and tell the tribune exactly what's going to happen, so that the Romans are well informed. But I'm stunned, because here you have a passage where those of Paul's own people are trying to do what to him? Kill him. And the people who are the symbols of oppression, who everybody hates, are the ones who are doing what? And rescuing him. And obviously, Luke is telling Theophilus quite plainly, listen, we know who's on the Lord's side. And it obviously ain't our people. God's been working his purpose and plan out in his own way. So what does the tribune do? He says, okay, let me get 2 centurions, 200 horsemen, 70 of them, send them on their way, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen, and send them so I could let Paul go from Jerusalem to Caesarea. See, and I said this the other day when it was the feast of the confession of St. Peter. I said, every time you hear Caesarea, Remember, people, Caesarea was the pagan city that Herod the Great built to please his Roman masters. So you leaving the holy city, Jerusalem, oh my God. Do you see something? And so I hope you write that in the text somewhere so you don't forget. The city where, as a Jew and a Pharisee, Paul should have felt safe in. He has to leave to go where? To Caesarea. In order that they might save and rescue his life. God has a strange way of doing things in life, people. A letter is written explaining exactly what has happened, why they're sending Paul to the governor there, and the Tribune says, don't worry, I'm going to tell the others that's where I sent him, so they're going to have to go there, they're going to have to come there to you if they want to find out what should be the final fate of this man called Paul. Paul gets there, and Paul is given freedom to move up and around for his friends to look while he waits for his accusers to arrive. What a difference, eh? In one case, he's treated with what? Respect. He finds favor in the eyes of the Gentiles. But in the eyes of his own people, they already did what? Slap him across his face, plot to kill him. You get the picture? Now, I don't know if you're choosing sides. You better be careful who you choose to find place of refuge at the end of the day. And so Theophilus obviously has painted the picture so that nobody reading this passage is going to have any doubt in their mind of where the Roman authorities and powers stand when it comes to Acts of the Apostles. Let's see what happens in chapter 24. My next reader, please. Oh, sorry, somebody.
Chapter 24. 5 days later, the high priest, Ananias, came down with some elders and attorney, a certain Tertullus, and they reported their case against Paul to the. When Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Your Excellency, because of you, we have long enjoyed peace, and reforms have been made for this people because of your foresight. We welcome this in every way and everywhere with utmost gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you to hear us briefly with your customary graciousness. Jews throughout the world, and the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and so we seized him by examining him yourself. You will be able to learn from him concerning everything of which we accuse him. But the Jews also joined in the charge by asserting that all this was true. To speak, Paul replied, I cheerfully make my defense, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation. And as you can find out, it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. They did not find me disputing with anyone in the temple or stirring up a crowd either in the synagogues or throughout the city. Neither can they prove to you the charge that they now bring against me. But this I admit to you, that according to that, I worship the God of our ancestors, believing everything laid down according to the law or written in the prophets. I have a hope in God, a hope that they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the unrighteous. Therefore, I do my best always to have a clear conscience toward God and all people. Now, after some years, I came to bring alms to my nation. While I was doing this, they found me in the temple, completing the rite of purification without any crowd or disturbance. But there were some Jews from Asia. They ought to be here before you to make an accusation, if they have anything against me. Or let these men here tell you what crime they have found when I stood before the council. Unless it was this one sentence that I called out while standing before them. Rather well informed about the way, adjourned the hearing with the comment, when Lysias, the tribune, comes down, I will decide your case. Then he ordered the centurion to keep him in custody, but to let him have some liberty and not to prevent any of his friends from taking care of his needs. Some days later, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, as he discussed justice, self-control, and the coming judgment, Felix became frightened and said, "Go away for the present. When I have an opportunity, I will send for you." At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, and for that reason, he used to send for him very often and converse with him. After 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and since he wanted to grant the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul.
Watch the movement now. They're in Caesarea. And who comes all the way to Caesarea? Supposed to be in Jerusalem, doing what? Watching over the sacrifices, making sure that the priests perform their duties, making sure that nobody enters the Holy of Holies but him. In other words, he had his duties to perform in the temple. But here he is doing what? Taking this long journey from Jerusalem to where? Which was? Pagan. Instead of him trying to hold them up and keep them together, here he is on a long journey and carrying who with him? An attorney. Now, lawyers don't blame me for that. I didn't write the text. Huh? Yeah, it's in the book. And the sad part about it is that the lawyer begins by buttering up the governor. Oh, we know you brought the peace. All right, yo, don't pick on some lawyers who are here with us. Listen, people. He's an agitator among the Jews. He's a member of the sect of the Nazarene. In other words, he belongs to the sect as led by Jesus. And the third charge is that he's profaned the temple by bringing Gentiles in. And Paul turns around and says, I'm still innocent. I don't prove any of these charges. Not a one. He says, and unfortunately, the people who accuse me of bringing somebody into the temple of Gentile descent, they're not even here, the Jews from Asia Minor. And Paul literally says to them, you all, simply because you reject the resurrection, you are the ones who are falsely accusing me, and I have no real case to answer. And as the argument once again became intense, the governor says, no, stop. Wait until someone else comes so they can hear this case along with me. The problem is that Palestine, and I hope you all never forget this, was always a hotbed for controversy. Still that way to this very day. Okay? The problem is that the people who were sent to rule in this particular area were known, curry favor, bend, kiss, whatever you want to call it, to the populace so that they could be in favor with them in order to have their way. We saw it with Pilate. Pilate knew there was no crime that Jesus committed that deserved death. And what does he do? Bring the bowl of water. And he washes his hands and literally says to them, may his blood be upon your head. And they, in their violent attitude, says, so be it. And he says, take your king. We have no king except Caesar. Not even God, but Caesar. Do him as you will. And the governors had a long history of allowing those in power within Jerusalem to have their way. Wife showed up. They begin to hear the case. But poor Felix is scared. He's terrified by this gospel message because he knows that it pushes him to make an ultimate decision. And he says, no, I don't want to hear no more. Go away from us. Leave us alone. And what he did, he tried to bring Paul back on occasions so that he could see if he could get some money from him. Money talk. And that was the hope. And he's hoping that the monies that they would have collected from the churches in that area, Paul would have been used, it could have been used to set Paul free. And Paul refused to go down that road because he wanted to be a person of integrity. And he knew that his destiny was already sealed. You get the picture, everybody? 2 years have gone by. Those people who are fasting probably either dead or compromised. I want you to understand, Pilate never made the right decision. He left. Whether he died or he left, he still didn't make the right decision. You have all these other people who were brought into the picture. They had the opportunity to hear the gospel message, and they didn't respond. And they're out of the picture. And somebody else comes in. And the minute they Felix was succeeded by who? And since he wanted to do what?
He's a Jew.
Oh yeah. Oh, I gotta please this crowd. Yes. What you mean? Listen. You married into class. If you're gonna pay a high price to the Romans to become high priests, what's to stop your women from deciding, hey, I better try catch someone in the high ranks so I could be with the muckamucks? Okay? And don't forget, people, don't forget, you already had a bunch of mixed half-breeds. Herod was a half-breed. He was an Idumean Jew. You have the Hazardine family. They're mixed up. Who's this? Apollos would have been intellectually a little mixed up, but I believe in a real sense he was still a faithful Jew in the diaspora. But I want you to understand that there are plenty of persons who now find that reality is settling in. Don't forget, Esther was a Jew. Esther married a husband who was a Gentile. If it wasn't for Esther's marriage, they would have been all dead. Okay? And so you need to recognize the fact that in many cases, there were situations where Jewish people married other persons. Okay? Yeah, well, look at even T's mother and grandmother. They were Jewish in nature before they became Christians, but they had married into pagan families. So the rules, once you got further away from Jerusalem, of course, you had to realize you stay there looking for some Jewish man to come along of high standard who you think would be a good catch. Paul was Roman and Jewish at the same time. Because of his birthplace, where he was born as a Roman citizen, okay, in the city of Tarsus, okay, but they sent him back to his heritage home in Jerusalem to sit at Gamaliel's feet so he could be trained as a Pharisee, okay? About keeping clean and not eating this and all the rituals, the kosher laws and everything else. I think after a while, it becomes overbearing. And for him, Christianity allowed him the freedom that he needed, so that he was able to say, I find it easy to be all things to all men, so that I might win some, save some. That's what he says. Okay? Chapter 25. Page is a little sticky, so we end up in chapter 26 or 27.
Acts chapter 25. Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Caesarea, to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and the leaders of the Jews gave him a report against Paul. They appealed to him and requested as a favor to them against Paul to have them transferred to Jerusalem. They were in fact planning an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, "Let those of you who have the authority come down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, then let him accuse him." After he had stayed among them more than 8 or 10 days, the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he arrived, the Jews who had gone down from Jerusalem surrounded him bringing many serious charges against him, which they could not prove. Paul said in his defense, I have in no way committed an offense against the law of the Jews, or against the temple, or against the emperor. Festus wishing to do the Jews a favor, asked Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there before me, or bring these charges? Paul said, I am appealing to the emperor's tribunal. This is where I should be tried, for which I deserve to die. I am not trying to escape death, but if there's nothing to their charge against me, no one can turn me over to them. I appealed to the emperor. And Festus, after he had conferred with his consul, replied, you have appealed to the emperor you will go. After several days had passed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea. They were staying there several days. Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man here who was left in prison by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me about him and asked me for a sentence against him. I told them that it was not the custom of the Romans to hand over anyone before the accused had met the accusers face to face and had been given an opportunity to make a defense against the charge. So when they met here, I lost no time, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man. Instead, they had certain points of disagreement with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died. But when Paul asserted to be alive, whom Paul asserted to be alive. Since I was at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wished to go to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of his imperial majesty, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to the emperor. Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came, and Festus said, King Agrippa, and all here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish community petitioned me both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and when he appealed to his imperial majesty, I decided to send him. But I have nothing definite to write. After we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner without indicating the charges against him. The word of the Lord.
Doesn't this sound familiar to you all? Doesn't this sound familiar to you all? Before Pilate, and he could find absolutely no charge to bring against him. I want you to look carefully, people. The man only being on the job for 3 days. Only for 3 days. And these people are already determined that they will do whatever it takes to make sure. Okay? They come, and Paul still refutes them and says, you got no evidence, you have no proof, you have absolutely nothing. But I think what is disturbing is that for the second time, look carefully, people, they asked for Paul to be brought where? So that they could do what? Ambush him on the way. No, there's a difference almost 3 years later. Okay, huh? Paul was popular. think I see people being bloodthirsty, but this is ridiculous. Okay? That they are out to kill this man. And Paul, wrongly or rightly, when the governor realized, he says, no. If I'm deserving of death, send me to the emperor. Note carefully, people, the governor does not make the decision on his own. He has to go and consult some people before he comes back to tell Paul, you appeal to the governor, you appeal to the emperor you shall go. And then we are told that when Agrippa arrives, Agrippa would have been the son, King Agrippa would have been the son of King Herod who killed James. That whole family were half Jews. Okay? They were Idumean Jews. And so they committed a great offense in that regard. So he called Agrippa and his wife to come listen to the case. Agrippa and Bernice, they come and arrive at Caesarea and ask them to come and sit and decide the case with him because he can't understand what these charges are all about that they're bringing against Paul. He doesn't even know how to write a letter to the governor, to the emperor, sorry. And the sad part about it is that you don't even have charges to send this man to Rome on. Something should have clicked in his head and said, this don't make sense. Let this man go free because, but he said, anyway, you appeal to the emperor you should. And we are told that to Agrippa and Bernice, as he tries to lay before them the whole question about Christianity. And therefore, we know that come chapter 26, we're about to hear Paul make again a firm defense of why he is where he is in his spiritual life. In fact, in anticipation of next week, God's willing, I want you all to know that we will see Paul yet again give an account of his conversion. And I told you all, anytime you see any biblical passage repeating itself more than once, it has got to be absolutely crucial and important to the story of Christianity. So next week we will examine it and see for ourselves why Paul has to make this. We're coming near to the end of Acts of the Apostles, and we cannot do so without hearing Paul yet again defend himself. Questions, comments, concerns? Please pass the microphone around so that what do you find sad about this whole story? Speaking to the microphone.
Yes, I would tell you what is sad is how determined the Jews were to kill Paul. They just kept fighting, even though they had made ground students. But charging them of the crimes they claimed he had committed.
Look, time, resources, you pick up and left home in Jerusalem to travel well over 150 miles away to Caesarea, in a pagan city where you are expected to survive. And you hang around there for a whole almost 3 years. Because you are so, I don't want to use the word hell-bent. All right? I cannot for the life of me see religious people so warped and bent out of shape that they would spend all that precious time, energy. My God, people, look at the amount of money. And not only that, you leave behind your religious duties as chief priests who watch in the temple.
You mentioned just now, think about this. Money. Why they afraid that Paul's take away their people, hence their economic base will decrease. That's really why they really wanted to give it Paul.
And the temple, and you see at the end of the day, it ain't really religious. It's a question of economics. That's what you're saying, Nikki.
Yeah.
Could be. But my God, who watching the kitty? While you away? Yes, God.
So, Jack came back, so how do you want to know that? Is that also?
I don't know exactly what transpired in terms of whether they hired another high priest. But what I'm saying is that where your focus is supposed to be as the chief priests, you've left that behind to go to a city where you can't even worship. To try somebody to find them guilty. Use the microphone.
Yeah, kind of, I heard the statement on that, right? But to me, if it was me, right, all you would have to do is keep Paul out of the city of Jerusalem. So he would have his influence, and then also because of that, you still have the disciples that sold in Jerusalem. So they were still doing basically the same thing Paul was doing, but he was just so.
Yeah, it's very, he was like many of the other leaders who were very bold and upfront. Don't forget, Stephen got himself in trouble the same way. Stephen said to them, I feel sorry for y'all. Y'all just as stubborn and just as hard-headed as your forefathers and the rest of that crowd. Oh, look, I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Y'all missed the boat.
But they continued that mindset for over 3 years because, like you said, it was the Jews from Asia that came and stirred them up.
They had gone home.
And they still have this. So he sent out of the city of Jerusalem, way to Caesarea, but yet still crying out.
Who's in prison?
Who's in prison?
Yeah.
So he was doing better than that. He was in prison. But it's like someone was just urging them on, kill this man.
Because, like most cases, they figure if you cut off the head, then you don't have to worry. And Christianity has never been about cutting off the head. Yeah, and the sad part about it, it still will spring back up because the blood of the martyrs just fed the life of the church and it just kept on spreading in the front.
What I found disturbing was the fact that he spent so much time in prison on unpopular charges and people wanted to kill him for what he was doing. It was like 3 years, they kept him in prison, they did not food.
Not even a decent trial.
You know?
It's sad. Up here in the front.
Cigarette, oh yeah, you can tell me, I've been cigarette, and it's like 1 hour to get from Jerusalem to Caesarea, you had to stay.
You mean in transportation?
Yes,
in modern transportation.
You don't come away, yeah, you go to Jerusalem. So in my mind, like 3 nights is a good distance from Jerusalem to Caesarea.
Yeah, and if you had to do it by horseback or walking, and the tragedy is that you burn yourself out before.
It sounded like it was some word of being said that, oh, I want to be the high priest, but the high priest is so eager to take him out very good, because he made that extra effort to go to another providence that
You mean to travel around the diaspora? Go back to something that Miki said. I believe it's not just economics that they're fighting against. The problem is that Christianity has undone their authority and their power. And so their influence throughout the world, in Asia Minor, in Europe, in Northern Africa, all because the gospel message is being spread. It's undermining a lot of their work and their influence. Do not forget that according to Jewish customs, every Jew throughout the world had to make a pilgrimage back every 3 years. So every 3 years you had to pack up everything, close down the shop, shut up your house, close down your business, head to Jerusalem. And while you're making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for either Pentecost, the Day of Atonement, or for Passover, or for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or for Yom Kippur, you needed to realize of time in Jerusalem before they pack up yet again to go back to wherever they came from. What the Christianity has done is that Christianity is beginning to sweep across Asia Minor. And I want to remind you all, people, that while the Acts of the Apostle tells us about the spread of Christianity through Asia Minor and further on to the west, to the east in terms of Europe, the other place like wildfire was in Northern Africa. Northern Africa becomes extremely important for Christianity. The major theological centers and theological schools are found in Northern Africa in the first few centuries of the church's existence. They're found in Alexandria. They're found in Hippo, where Christianity really began to take some very strong roots. The only thing that lessened the control of Christianity was when Islam came along, around about the 6th century, and it began to spread through Northern Africa, spread through Palestine, and then into Asia Minor, with Christianity fighting back to push the Muslims back out of those areas. But at the end of the day, Christianity unraveled a whole lot in terms of the roots that had been put down, and people found themselves face to face with the demands of the gospel. And with the emperor eventually becoming Christian in the 4th century, then many people had no choice, because he decided this would be the religion for the empire.
Online made a comment.
Sorry.
Someone online made a comment. Someone said it is sad that Paul has been in prison for almost 3 years and that he goes through the same accusations from the Jews, his people, as Jesus did. And if I could have Salome retype what she wants to say, please, Salome Charles.
The sad part about it is that people, the point is very clear, and that is that you have to be learned that perseverance is a must for us as Christians. Just because you happen to have a victory today, don't believe that all the stumbling blocks are being taken out of your way. Doubling his efforts for tomorrow. While you and I go into our bed tonight, they already have a staff meeting and figuring out how they're going to mess up tomorrow for so many of us. So you better make sure you pray before you go to sleep tonight, and you pray yourself up when you jump out of your bed tomorrow, because you know they come in with something good. They didn't come back. All right, let's pray and then we'll shut it out tonight. Upon you, the rock of our salvation, that amidst all the chances and the changes of this mortal life, we may trust in you, knowing fully well that you will work it to our good, for your honor, and for your glory's sake. We thank you for the witness of your servant Paul, and for all those who must have lifted him up in prayer and watched him go through so much. And yet, he remained faithful to the very end. Jesus, help us to be faithful in our hour of testing, that we may this we ask in your name.